This week, Calling All Heroes saw more action and Collegiate Overwatch is taking the stage. Hey folks, my name is Apostle and welcome back to Watching Overwatch, also known as WoW. This is the series where I give you the rundown on what's new and important in Overwatch Esports, so you can keep track of this crazy game. Now, while it has been a slower couple weeks, we still have some great updates for all our tournaments full of up-and-coming talent, so let's take a look at that. But first, our must-watch matches. Out of the collegiate scene, BSC Bobcats versus St. Clair Saints, a very interesting match between two teams that are both trying to solidify themselves as a top contender. And then also Northwood versus Fisher, two teams that arguably are already top contenders. Very good matches coming out between them. On the Calling All Heroes side, Exo Azeza versus Queen's Gambit in the lower bracket was a close match with several recognizable names that is worth watching. And then finally, YFP Oblivione versus Nightmare Timeless in the upper bracket. Both very iconic teams at this point. They put on a great show as always. Anyway, let's just jump right into things here, starting off with Collegiate. Now, I want to take a moment to point something out. I see a lot of people say they miss the location-based teams for Overwatch League, and how they loved having a local team to root for. Well, if you're one of those people, I think Collegiate might be the answer for you. The competition is at a higher level than ever before thanks to OWCS elevating the regional level of skill. So let's break down where we're at. In this tournament, the top 64 teams from Swiss Stage played 2 single elimination rounds, leading us to our top 16, and right away we can see plenty of big dogs here. When comparing to the official collegiate power rankings, we can see all the teams that we'd expect, with a couple surprises too. Ball State, Siena Heights, and Cumberland all qualified to the top 16 despite ranking in the bottom 4 of those power rankings. We also see Arizona State actually failed to qualify after they lost to Converse in the round of 64. Maybe most surprising though is the absence of Rutgers, who despite being a top 10 team basically all year, actually lost their spot to UT Dallas after a 3-0. Now taking a look here, we can see some close matches right from the get-go, with our 3rd and 4th seeds both going to a map 5, as Bellevue lost in a 3-2 to Cumberland, and Siena Heights, they actually made Northwood sweat. Northwood, of course, is that roster with CJ, Lep, Icy, Haven, so they're really an incredible contender, and for Siena to play them that close is pretty incredible. Siena themselves, though, they have plenty of great rookies, as they have Arsona, Temp, and Social, who you all might recognize as being part of the roster of Tanuki Esports that has seen decent success in OWCS. Likewise, Illinois dropping a map to Ball State is also pretty surprising, as for anyone who's unaware, Illinois has a roster of Lethal, Maimon, Kuffa, Admiral, and Lugumino. This is obviously a very good team with players that are all of the top caliber. So for Ball State, a team with players that, personally, I don't recognize at all yet, a pretty impressive result for them. But I think these pale in comparison to Maryville losing to Fisher. Maryville is the team that consists of King, Vision, Dante, False, and Juby and Squid. Fisher, on the other hand, they have solid players, with Renko probably being their most standout, but I don't think anyone would have put these guys over Maryville. Now, unfortunately, all those matches I just mentioned did happen off stream, so we won't know exactly what went down, but it does look like we'll be in for a very competitive playoffs here. And the games we did get to see seem to indicate that even more, as we saw BSC Bobcats, also known as Bryant Stratton, win against St. Clair in a 3-1. Now, both these teams are filled with players that have made OWCS appearances, and it really showed. Now, St. Clair is the sole Canadian representative in this tournament, so they're kind of against the world here, but unfortunately, they were just a little bit too slow coming into this game, as the first 2 maps were dropped without them scoring a point. Maps 3 and 4 were much closer, but that late in the series, the momentum, it really works against you, and ultimately, they did end up losing and getting sent to the lower bracket. The other close match we got to see was in Fisher going against Northwood. Both aforementioned teams that met in the upper quarters, and Northwood took the win in a 3-1 here as well. Now, this match played much more akin to what we were all expecting, but it does make Fisher's earlier victory even more surprising, as Maryville is normally ranked higher than Northwood. If anything, one might have expected this match to be closer for Fisher, as they're normally the number 6 team to Northwood at number 5. Now, Fisher did take a map here, but outside of that, it was all Northwood. So overall, we got a strong set of matches, but it is worth noting that Cumberland was the only team who was ranked bottom 4 in the power rankings that actually made it out of the round 1, being able to beat Bellevue, who was the 4th seed coming out of Swiss. Their next match against either Blinn or Illinois in the lower bracket will be very telling as to just how strong these guys actually are. So despite the power rankings not being shaken up too heavily, there are still some things worth keeping an eye on here, and I think it'll be really interesting to see how the rest of these matches play out. Collegiate is kinda hype right now. Anyway, moving on, let's talk about Calling All Heroes, as they just finished the Challengers Minor 3. Several familiar names made appearances here, with Nightmare Timeless, Exo Azathoth, Fable, and Aw Yes all returning from Minor 2, and YFP came back as well, but this time they came with a new partnership. Previously they'd been with Super Shy, but This time around, they joined forces with Oblivione. We also saw a team called Queen's Gambit enter the ring, and this team is from the same org as Team Gambit. And then finally rounding out the teams, we had Hypnos Isolus, I think, which I'm sure you can guess where that team came from, and also a team simply called Moon. Now, Team Moon, don't let the name fool you, as just looking at the roster, you can see there's still several heavy hitters here, and they're definitely not a team that you can ignore. Now, our top teams made themselves known very quickly, as the first round actually saw 4 3-0 matches. With one note, Azathoth beat Queen's Gambit pretty handily, despite placing lower than them in the Swiss stage. Azathoth is a team that's been around for every minor so far, and despite making a few changes to their roster, they're still solid as a rock. I think the big pickup for them was Jeremy87, who was actually part of the Bubble Blowers team that knocked out Azathoth in Minor 2. They managed to make it a little bit farther with every playoffs they make, so at this rate, they might even be the champions before long. It's a really exciting squad to watch here. Speaking of teams that have been around for quite a while, Fable has been a long-time constant of calling all heroes, but unfortunately, things did not go their way this tournament. After a loss to Moon, they actually ended up being knocked out by Ayas, which could definitely be considered an upset, as not only did Ayas finish lower than them in Swiss, but even just looking at the players, they're all fairly high quality names. Now, despite strong performances coming out from Azathoth and Team Moon, YFP Oblivione and Nightmare Timeless are just a step above, as they both cleared away the competition with clean sweeps. As our two finalists from the previous minor, it's not a huge surprise. Despite tweaks to the rosters, the cores remain intact, and these are very strong cores. Now, back in the lower bracket, we actually saw Queen's Gambit making a pretty killer run back here, starting with a win against Moon. Now, Moon originally beat these guys in a 2-1 during the Swiss stage, so Queen's Gambit, they kind of had the odds stacked against them here, but they managed to pull out a clean 3-1 win. Santix and Santana especially having a great series against the arguably more proven names of Mari and AJMR. They didn't look outclassed at all. Now, part of me does wonder how much of this came down to comp differences, as we actually didn't see much mirroring at all throughout the series. Despite similar comp playstyles, a lot of time there was 1 or 2 heroes swapped between the teams that I think really highlighted the differences between how they played. Now, their underdog story didn't end there, however, as their next match was against Azathoth, the same team that sent them to the lower in the first place, and this was a near complete reversal, as Queen's Gambit won in another 3-1. I think the big thing here was Misson on the Genji, doing incredible work on that hero that Azathoth couldn't really match. Jeremy87, while being a very talented flex DPS, actually has not shown a huge amount of Genji play, typically choosing to favor the Venture, or in particular the Pharah gameplay. Now, despite Azathoth playing around that Genji-sized hole in the roster for the earlier matches, I think this match is where the impact of it was really felt. What likely happened is that Gambit, they just took a look at their earlier loss to Azathoth, and they identified that weakness, and just came up with plans to counter it. From this match and the matches prior, we know Misson just has a bit more flexibility, and it let Queen's Gambit play the styles just that much stronger. This team is showing a huge level of growth in a very short time frame, beating not 1 but 2 teams that had only a day prior shut them down pretty hard. So honestly, this is some great stuff from them. Now, back in the upper, we got a banger match between none other than our top 2 teams as they met in the upper finals, which ended with YFP Oblivione taking the win in a 3-2 incredible reverse sweep. This YFP core looks better every time we see them, and at this point, the rivalry between these two teams is one of the best in the scene. Nightmare Timeless, they came out swinging the first 2 maps, but once YFP was warmed up, they started pulling ahead bit by bit, winning fight after fight. The most interesting part of this match, I think, was the final map, where YFP actually committed to running a Sombra comp, and it actually worked fairly well. Despite Sombra's current state, these guys would have you believe she's as strong as ever. Some really creative strategies coming out here, and I love to see it. Now, Nightmare Timeless, though, they didn't take this loss lying down. They went into the lower bracket with a vengeance and swiftly put an end to Queen's Gambit underdog story. They were able to win that match in a 3-1. And this wasn't a bad performance from Gambit by any means. They did take a map, which is actually pretty significant. But it just goes to show there is a bit of a tier break here between these two teams. And with that, it brought us back to the grand finals between YFP and Nightmare yet again. This time though, things were different, as YFP Oblivione cleaned house in a dominant 4-0. And guys, this really was dominant, as Nightmare Timeless scored only 2 points in the entire match. 1 point on King's Row and 1 point on Gibraltar is all they got to show for their efforts. Quite frankly, I don't know how this result even came about, considering just how evenly matched these teams were so recently, but apparently something allowed YFP to just level up an insane amount. Bun especially, we talked about them looking great during Radavidity's run in OWCS. And that improvement has really continued, as they're playing an absolutely incredible Genji, really making the most out of the current meta by maximizing the value on that hero. At this point, Bun has absolutely solidified themselves as the best flex DPS in Calling All Heroes. But yeah, ultimately, these grand finals were surprisingly not close. But really, you do gotta respect YFP for just how much they stepped up. You definitely gotta consider them the favorites to win the upcoming Calling All Heroes Major at this point. On the other hand though, Nightmare Timeless, I'm sure they are not going to take this lying down. They are going to be coming back, and I'm sure the next time these two teams meet, it will be much more competitive. Now, next I want to talk about a tournament I talked about a couple weeks ago, which is the Pro Chaser Association, which is kind of the premier Chinese tournament at the moment. It's a bit of a hard tournament to talk about considering it only streams on Bilibili, but there are a couple great resources to follow it if you are interested in how things are going there. A guy named Giant Omelette, who is the social manager for Once Again, has actually been posting some great write-ups about how the tournament is going as well as the state of the teams. He actually also recently posted a translation of a full documentary about Once Again. I would highly recommend checking out his stuff as he's providing great coverage of the Chinese scene, and he's giving tons of great insight. He recently shared that Kapir Cat, which is the team with Molly, Lengsa, Aprita, and Becky, they've been dominating so far as they have yet to drop a single map, and they're currently the team to beat. If that doesn't speak to the dedication of these Chinese players being able to play so well even when the game is barely available in the country, I don't know what does. It's certainly a great reason to why you'd want to keep an eye on the scene. Now, you can find Giant Omelette's articles on the Cryx website, as well as his socials, which I'll have links to in the description right down below, so definitely make sure you check those out so you can keep up with everything going on there. Now, let's move on to players and roster updates. Starting things off, it has been confirmed that Paintbrush has retired. You'll actually remember him as the former player, coach, and social media manager for Los Angeles Valiant. But he will now be joining the likes of Dove, Dynasty, Sharp, and Don as these Overwatch 1 contenders legends who are now passing the torch to the new gen. Speaking of the new gen though, O3 Splash is back once again. After picking up Romani's team and dropping them after stage 4, they've now found a new roster in Team Z. Now, obviously, OWCS is done, but they're going to be participating in the Face It Masters League, which is still ongoing. So we'll see if they can continue to find success. Now, following OWCS, the team actually made a couple big signings in Lep and Manually. Lep is the more notable one, of course, but I'm personally a big fan of Manually. He went crazy on Citrus Nation in stage 1, and then unfortunately rode the bench a little bit for Fluffy Dreamland for quite a while, so we didn't see much play coming from him recently, but if he's back in a starting spot, I really hope he shines. Next up though, here's the really exciting news. Soul Infernal is back, in all but name. Patrick Dunn have announced their new roster, and guys, it's kinda hype. Mag is going to be returning with the classic DPS duo of Zest and MN3, ready to prove themselves once more, and Skewed is going to be returning as well to join them on support. Fixa, unfortunately, does seem to still be sticking on Poker Face, but in his place, they've signed Opener and Irony, who are two very talented players that I think should be more than able to fill his shoes. Now, yes, Soul Infernal, they may not have been the best team in OWL by any stretch of the imagination, but these guys were iconic, right? The way Skewed went from being seen as a break one trick to like a top tier flex support, Zest, who was constantly going for the ego duels with other tracers, just trying to stick them with the pulse, MN3 and his Widow highlights. I mean, I can only hope we'll get to see more moments like that. And Meg, please don't let us down, man. This is his final chance to beat the allegations. He's got to show us something big here. Now, you may be wondering, what's the point of the hype for this team when Korea currently doesn't have an ongoing tournament? Well, that brings us to the next segment, so let's take a look at what we have coming up next. Patrick Dunn will actually be competing in a tournament called the Aurora Cup, which is another Chinese tournament. This is actually an invitational with some great rosters, but none more exciting than Once Again. That's right, making their first appearance since EWZ, they'll be playing here in this tournament. And for anyone who remembers the Overwatch League days and how the matches between Spark and Infernal used to be, this is super exciting. Now, the teams here feature players from all over APAC, and while the top Korean teams aren't competing, it should be a great competition nonetheless. The Aurora Cup will have its group stage going from November 11th to November 13th. The top 2 teams from each group will advance to the playoffs. The playoffs are going to be from November 14th to November 21st. Games will be streamed on Bilibili, and right now there's no word of an English broadcast, but fingers crossed that we see something here. And even if there's not, I'm definitely going to try and follow this tournament as close as I can, just because some of the matchups that we see here should be really, really good, so hopefully we get to see them. Next up, and happening very soon, is the Collegiate playoffs, which are actually ongoing, and the next round of matches will be on November 9th and November 10th. So make sure you check out the official OW Esports channels to see these matches being streamed. But also, the schools themselves may actually stream them as well. The matches will continue on the following weekend as well, so no worries if you can't tune in this time. And then finally, in the farther future, just a reminder that the main event in Stockholm will be happening from November 22nd to the 24th. This should be the peak of Overwatch Esports, so you do not want to miss it. Make sure you mark your calendars, set reminders, you gotta make sure you tune into that. But with that, this week is a wrap for now. Really exciting stuff coming out of the collegiate scene, and these rosters that we're seeing in the APAC region are genuinely kind of thrilling. Even if we are in a bit of an OWCS waiting room, I think it's great to see just how much we still have to talk about. Now, as always, links to everything I talked about can be found in the description right down below, including links to Liquipedia where you can find specific times of matches in your own time zone, so make sure you check that out. There's plenty of things to follow and keep track of, but hey, if you have trouble with it all, that's what I'll be here for. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all back again very soon. Take care.